Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. We're going to give it a few more moments as we have a large registration list today. Over 450 people have registered for this afternoon's session. So we'll give it a few more moments and then we'll get this session underway. Just give it a few more moments, see several people still joining the session. Okay, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. Thank you for joining us today for another webinar as part of Aptem's series of activities designed to support both Aptem customers and the wider apprenticeship community with recent apprenticeship changes. We have over 450 people registered for today's event, and we are truly pleased to share the latest insights with such a large audience. My name is James Templeman, Marketing Manager here at Aptem, and I'll be supporting the running of today's session. Joining us today is Tony Allen, CEO at Allen Apprenticeships and Skills, and Georgina Burton, Head of Implementation at Aptem. Tony and Georgina will introduce themselves in a moment, but if we could move on to the next slide, please, I will draw your attention to a few housekeeping items. Oh, we've changed over already. So, first of all, we will be recording this session, and everyone who has registered will receive a copy by email. Please do feel free to share this with your colleagues and others in your network. You are muted throughout the webinar, so if you need assistance, please do use the questions function. And if you also have any questions regarding the content of this session, please use the question function and we will go through these towards the end of the webinar. If we could move on to the next slide, please. So in this session, Tony will discuss the latest regulatory changes announced in the funding rules and what they mean for delivery. Tony will also provide analysis and guidance on the updates to functional skills and an examination of other recent changes. With experience as a CEO of a training provider and now Aptem's head of implementation, Georgina will explain how the Aptem platform supports customers through these updates. At the end of the presentation, we will open the floor to attendee questions. So let's get started. I'd like to hand over to Tony to get the session rolling.
Okay, thank you very much, James, and good afternoon, everyone. It's great to be with you this afternoon, and I really hope that you find the webinar for the next hour useful. As James has said, please log your questions in the Q&A space, and we will be monitoring the questions as we go through, and there will certainly be time to answer as many as we can at the end. I'll be upfront here by saying we don't know all the answers yet to some of the changes. There are a significant number of issues that are not clear from either what the department said originally or from the subsequent version of the funding rules that came out a couple of weeks ago. And I and other colleagues have submitted, so far I think it's about 10 questions to the department for clarification, and of course we are still waiting for those to come back. But we will do our best to answer any specific questions that you have. In terms of the agenda for this afternoon, I thought we'd just row back a little from diving straight in to the changes to functional skills, just to reflect a little bit on the government's planned changes to apprenticeships, and perhaps just think about what we know so far, look at those recent announcements, but then get into the detail around the key changes within the funding rules, and specifically and heavily that's about the changes to functional skills. And as James has already said, there will be the opportunity for you to ask questions at the end. Okay, thanks. Next slide. So I think we all know this, but it is worth just recapping. There are half a dozen things that the government are thinking about, of any significance anyway, in terms of changes to apprenticeships. And most, if not all of these, they talked about even prior to being elected last summer. And certainly, Things are beginning to emerge now, 6 or 7 months into the new government, as we begin to understand the direction of travel in a bit more detail. The ones I've highlighted there, functional skills, short duration, payment simplification, and changes to endpoint assessment, we know a little bit more about because they were all the subject of announcements during National Apprenticeship Week. So we'll talk a little bit more about those in a minute. We are still waiting for a decision around the funding of level 7 apprenticeships. So we still don't know yet whether the publicised cessation of funding for level 7s is going to apply across the board, or whether it will only apply to some or not. I am told that an announcement on that is imminent, but that's a government word that can mean anything from a week to 6 months. The other thing that we don't know a colossal amount more about is foundation apprenticeships. Again, lots of excitement around that, what they might look like, whether the person has to be employed, all of those sorts of issues. But again, I'm told that there will be more information about those coming soon. So today we're going to focus mainly on functional skills, but I will also touch on short duration, payment simplification, and the changes to EPA. Thanks. Next slide. So let's start off with the three other areas, and then we can really focus on functional skills. So shorter duration apprenticeships, what do we know? Well, so far we know that these are going to begin to be available for delivery from this coming August. We know that the minimum term for the apprenticeships selected are going to, the minimum term is going to be reduced from 12 to 8 months. That requires a statutory change, so that will require the approval of Parliament to reduce that, because the 12-month minimum duration is enshrined in law currently. We know from the department that they so far have identified 3 potential trailblazer standards. That's the level 2 healthcare support worker, the level 3 production assistant, and the level 2 dual fuel smart meter installer. And Skills England, who officially takes over from the ESFA and other responsibilities within the department from the end of this month, Skills England will be tasked with identifying other suitable apprenticeship standards. Now, I've been asked a few times already, well, we think we've got a standard we deliver that could be delivered in 8 months. How do we go about that? I would suggest that you contact the department. My understanding is that trailblazer groups are going to be involved in this as well. So another avenue might be to go onto the current IF8 website, find out who the person in charge of the trailblazer group is, and contact them if you think you deliver a standard. I do not expect, I should say, that hundreds of standards are going to have the minimum duration reduced. I think we will end up with a select few standards that are available for delivery over 8 months, and almost inevitably, and I know we have a level 3 there, but almost inevitably they are going to be in the level 2 space for the vast majority of them. But as I say, if you deliver one that you think can be delivered practically in 8 months, then go ahead and make the case for that. Contact the department. I will just say I am hearing on shorter duration apprenticeships that whilst it'll be possible on the ILR to have a start and finish date of 8 months duration, I'm not aware that they are intending to reduce the content of the standard. So in other words, nobody is proposing, for example, on the level 2 healthcare support worker standard, to take 30% of the content out. I think the content will remain the same. It's just that it's felt it can be delivered in a shorter time. Therefore, and this is me believing something to be the case, that the minimum requirement for off the job will remain at the 12-month level. So even if the period of time is reduced to 8 months, you can deliver it in 8 months. you will still be required to deliver a minimum of 278 hours off the job training, which is the current level for 12 months. So potentially, yes, it can be done in 8 months, but during that 8 months, it may be the requirement that the employee is released more often than the minimum 6 hours a week. But that's my understanding from what I'm hearing from the department, but that is of course all to be confirmed. Okay, next slide please. Streamlining endpoint assessment. Well, lots of exciting talk about this over the last sort of 2 or 3 weeks about what this means. And again, we have the department have teased us with a certain amount of information, and I think we all need to take a bit of a deep breath and understand a bit more and expect more information from the department. But if we take at face value what they've said so far, the proposals will apply to all apprenticeship standards at all levels. So it's not as though we're looking to change endpoint assessment arrangements for some standards. The department have definitely said it will be all of them. I think there are about 780 live standards currently, so quite a bit of work somebody's got to do. We understand the first endpoint assessment plans are being rewritten from next month. So I'm assuming that somebody's already thinking about this and looking at it and working on it. Again, this is going to be a key role for Skills England over the coming years to make sure this happens and to make sure it's implemented properly. The changes will be not just a what do we take out of assessment and who does what, but also as endpoint assessment plans are reviewed, they will also be looking at the methodologies for assessment. So does a plan need 3 methodologies for assessment? For example, a knowledge test, an observation, and a personal development discussion, where there's quite a bit of overlap. So some of the KSBs are being assessed more than once. So I think the changes will be quite radical in that respect. We're understanding that employers are going to have a role in this, where they're going to be asked to at least confirm, if not formally sign off, the fact that the learner, the apprentice, is meeting all of the required behaviours in the standard. We are told that new assessment plans, and for those of you who are familiar with such documents, they can be 30, 40 pages long, certainly some of the original ones, even some of the recent ones are at least 20 pages long. We are now told that the new plans will be around 2 pages now, and that they will identify the knowledge and skills elements that are going to be assessed by the provider, those that are still going to be assessed by the endpoint assessment organisation. As I've touched on, one of the key aspects of this is that all of any sense of duplication of assessment, i.e. any of the KSBs that are assessed more than once, will be removed, so that a knowledge statement, a skills or behaviour statement is only assessed once. And interestingly enough, we understand that the endpoint assessment organisation will remain responsible for overall quality assuring the assessment process, including that which might be undertaken by the provider. And I am also wondering whether it includes that might be undertaken by the employer, although we don't exactly know yet what the employer's role in the confirmation of behaviours is actually going to be. We don't know whether that's going to be actual signing off or just some form of confirmation, which of course can be quite different. But all sorts of implications here. So providers are going to be allowed to do some of the assessing. EPAOs will continue to do some. EPAOs have that overall quality assurance role. So, for example, does that mean, and we don't know yet, that training providers will have to become a centre, a registered centre for the endpoint assessment organisation? Normally, under things outside of the apprenticeship world, if an organisation is involved in the assessment of a qualification or the approval of a qualification, then it's required under the awarding organisation's rules and do-off-quals rules to be a centre. So does that mean that as a training provider you might have to be a centre? Don't know. What about things like direct grant status for providers? How might all of that work? And what about fees? What are EPAOs going to charge? Because if providers are doing some of the assessment and employers are involved too, you would naturally think that that's a big case for endpoint assessment organisations to charge less. Well, I'm sure they will argue that whilst that might be true, if they have got the expense of performing a quality assurance role over the provider, potentially even over the employer, then that is going to involve them in more costs. So some very interesting discussions and debates to be held around how all of that is going to work. Thank you. I love it when the civil service, and as a former senior civil servant myself, comes out with the word simplification, because even I know that normally means things are about to get much more complicated. But in this instance, if we read between the lines, I think actually this could genuinely be some form of simplification. So again, proposed to commence this from August. I'm not sure it'll all be entirely complete. I don't think it will be. But they want to remove, and there's a lot of sense in this, they want to remove providers having to complete a full ILR about a learner, and then the employer having to complete a lot of information that's exactly the same on what I still call their DAS account. And the intention is that once one of them is completed, then the other one is completed automatically. And that seems to make a lot of sense to me. So, and that way we will avoid lots of delocks where somebody's entered one date on the ILR and a different date on the DAS account and stuff like that. So again, watch this space, but I see that if the department can make it happen and make it happen properly, I see that as a positive change that should result in some of the current problems associated particularly with the operation of DAS accounts going away. Thank you. Next slide. Okay, so let's focus a little more, shall we, around functional skills for a while and just see, because this is the thing that's caused quite a bit of excitement and interest since it was announced a couple of weeks ago now, 2-3 weeks ago. So it was announced on the 11th of February as an immediate change from that date. And it means that all existing and new apprentices who are 19 or older on the start date of their apprenticeship will no longer need either a level 1 if they're doing a level 2 apprenticeship, or a level 2 if it's a level 3 and above, functional skills as a gateway requirement. Now, I just want to pause there and reflect on that statement, because sadly over the last 3 weeks, I have had lots of providers and a significant number of employers saying, we don't have to do functional skills anymore. This change does not mean that at all. All it means is that the requirement for a 19+ learner to have achieved a level of functional skills, depending on what standard, what level of apprenticeship they were delivering, has been removed. It does not mean that you will no longer be required to deliver functional skills. Talk a bit more about that in a second. Just to be very clear, there is no change for 16 to 18-year-olds. So the rules that were in place on the 10th of February will continue to apply to 16 to 18-year-olds. They will still have the functional skills requirement for level 1 if they're doing a level 2 apprenticeship, and for level 2 if they're doing a level 3 and above. So no change for 16 to 18-year-olds. Funding is available if a 19+ wishes to continue, or they wish to elect to receive formal functional skills training up to level 2 as part of their apprenticeship. Then you as a provider, providing they're working towards achieving their level 2 and they're going to take those assessments, then you can claim funding for that, as you always have done. But if the learner elects that they no longer wish to undertake that formal level 2, then you cannot claim funding anymore for that learner. Next slide, please. So, however, as I've touched on already, apprentices will need to continue to demonstrate their functional skills proficiency through occupational aspects of the standard. So let me just talk about that now. And I think probably the best way to explain this is in terms of Ofsted. Okay, I believe that these changes will have zero impact on Ofsted's approach to functional skills. Okay, I just do not believe. Ofsted will come in, Ofsted will inspect the provision, and Ofsted will still expect learners to be occupationally proficient in functional skills. What does that mean? That means if you've got a learner who in written work submissions is showing spelling and grammatical errors, then Ofsted will say to you, what are you doing to support that learner? What training, support, whatever you want to call it, are you giving to that learner to correct their grammatical errors, for example? Or if there is a particular aspect of maths that is relevant to the standard, so if you're doing the professional greenkeeper standard, for example, then you will need to know something about area and how to calculate the size of a football pitch or a golf course or whatever. And you will need to be able to understand that for purposes of how much weed killage you put on it, how much fertilizer, etc. And again, as a provider, you will have to be providing that level of support in functional skills to those learners. So you are still going to need to deliver functional skills. It does mean, however, that you are no longer tied to the level 2 curriculum if the learner elects not to do that. And that you can focus your functional skills efforts on what is occupationally relevant to that standard. You don't have to worry if algebra is not a thing for that standard, then you don't have to worry about that. Whereas historically you have, because you've had to try to get them through the whole of the level 2. So just bear that in mind, just think about that and think about the importance of continuing to undertake functional skills training, because it really is going to still be a thing. In terms of how we deal with the transition, the change, if you like, I'm sure you all know this because it is now in the funding rules. You have until April the 1st to agree with employers and apprentices if they wish to continue with their formal up to level 2 functional skills training, or if they've said, do you know what, I don't want to do this anymore and I'm going to opt out. So you are expected to have those conversations between the 11th of February and the 1st of April, and to evidence the discussion and to confirm that discussion by reissuing the training plan. Okay. Now, clearly, if somebody elects to continue to carry on with their level 2 training, and you're going to continue to draw funding, and that's in a training plan already, you don't need to change it. But if they elect to no longer receive their functional skills up to level 2 training, then the training plan needs to be changed to reflect that. Thank you. Now, as I've already said, this doesn't mean at the end of functional skills. I won't repeat that. It's there, and hopefully you all understand that. There will need to be greater focus on initial assessment and the needs of those individuals, not to now working towards that fixed curriculum. So you can make this more bespoke. You can make this much more individualistic. You know, I strongly suggest that you continue to do a functional skills initial assessment on everybody, and that way you can identify their occupationally relevant areas of need, if you like, when it comes to maths and English. For those of you who might have thought, I know what I'll do, I've got a load of 18-year-olds here who are coming up to their 19th birthday, I'll just put them on a break in learning, or I'll withdraw them even and restart them, then, well, you can do that, but I wouldn't advise it, because the department have foreseen that particular bit of provider behaviour, and what's going to happen is that if you restart somebody on the same apprenticeship standard, then their original start date will count for the purposes. So if they were 18 when they originally started, then the functional skills is still compulsory as far as they are concerned. Okay, next slide, please. So some people have welcomed this, and I hope that's in the context of fully understanding what it means. Um, there are some areas I think to think about. So you know, the department has actually put in the new funding rules. Um, a wonderful little paragraph, I think it's paragraph 43, that says, you know, any unusual retention patterns of providers stopping and starting learners and all the rest of it will be frowned upon and will form part of any discussions that they might be having around the apprenticeship accountability framework. So, you know, be in no doubt the department are monitoring this very closely. There are some questions around this that are not evident. As I said, I and a couple of colleagues have submitted a number of questions to the department, and we're still formally waiting for responses. And just a couple of those spring to mind. One is, you know, what does happen if a learner changes their mind? So you have the discussion before the 1st of April, and your 21-year-old learner says, yes, I'm going to carry on with my functional skills. I want to do my level 2 functional skills. Great, you carry on. And then in 3 months' time, they come back to you and say, actually, I've changed my mind. I don't want to do that now. Is that a problem? I don't see how it can be. But, you know, what we've asked is what's the department's attitude to that? I guess a lot of those might trigger the first bullet point here. That might constitute unusual retention patterns. But if it's the occasional learner, I genuinely don't see that as being a problem. Another one, however, is a bit more interesting. So now that the link between gateway endpoint assessment and the requirement to have level 2 functional skills has been broken, is it possible for a learner, for example, to continue their functional skills training after their endpoint assessment for their main aim? So they get to gateway, they haven't completed their functional skills, they go into endpoint assessment, they successfully complete their apprenticeship, they get pass or distinction, whatever, and then afterwards they want to carry on with their functional skills training. Is that going to be possible? Now, clearly hitherto, it hasn't been because of the mandatory requirement in gateway to have a level 2. But given functional skills are different learning aims and are not inextricably linked to the apprenticeship main learning aim, there's no theoretical reason why a learner couldn't continue their training afterwards. It's just whether the department wants that to happen, because it could get messy. I recognise it could get messy, you know. But so that's one of the questions we've asked, and it'll be very interesting to see what they come back with. So if that question was in your mind, I can already tell you I don't, I'm afraid, know the answer to that. But you need to remember that there are still some uncertainties. Paragraph 46.1, for example, in the new rules, where it's agreed an apprentice will study English and maths, providers must deliver the necessary amount of training needed in readiness for the assessments. Apprentices must attempt the assessments, but will not be required to achieve English and maths or take the endpoint assessment. That's the point about when do they have to take the assessment, so can they do it afterwards? And paragraph 41, again, this is just how the department don't always think when they write a sentence. So I've been asked, so do we have to just have had the discussion by the 1st of April, or do we have to have the training plan updated and signed by the 1st of April if there's a change? Well, the funding rule actually says this discussion must take place by the 1st of April 2025 and be recorded in the training plan. Now, I read that you need to just have the discussion by the 1st of April and you can subsequently record it in the training plan. But again, that is one of the things we've asked to be confirmed, and quickly, please, because if you've got to change training plans as well by the 1st of April, I personally do not think that is the case, but you know, we need to think about that. Okay, thank you. I'm going to hand over to Georgina now.
Thank you, Tony. I just thought I'd give Tony a couple of minutes break from talking. We'll have him back at the end, and he's got a few more points to make. But I thought it would be useful to just maybe take a pause at this stage to think about what we need to do to meet that 1st of April deadline, because we are now on the 6th of March. 1st of April will be with us before we know it. And I just want to run through about a half a dozen slides to think about the practical steps you can take now as providers to be able to make sure that you're compliant with those 1st of April funding rules. So I think the first step in meeting the rules is to actually know which of your learners are affected. If you're an Aptem customer, we're recommending the best way to do this is to use a Power BI funding dashboard. You can download your underlying data by going on the funding data tab and looking at learner aims, status and funding data table. And by filtering this data, you'll quickly be able to see the learner's age at the start of the programme, which will help determine whether they're in scope or not. You'll be able to see whether the learner has any open functional skills aims and also whether the learner is still in learning or on a break. We have put together a new article in the Help Centre, which I believe has been shared with customers by email, which will walk you through how to use the dashboard and explain which columns to focus on when identifying these learners using the data download. And I'd really recommend, if you haven't already done this, to run this check as soon as possible, so you've got plenty of time to have those meetings with your learners and employers about what's coming next. Once you've identified which learners are affected, the next step is having those important conversations with learners and employers about their options and updating your training plans. For new apprentices who want to start English and Maths, it must be included in their initial assessment and you need to clearly record it in the training plan. But for existing apprentices, it's a bit different. They need to continue their functional skills training until a formal decision is made. So you'll need to arrange a review meeting before the 1st of April to decide whether they'll continue or withdraw. And I think the key thing here is the documentation. Whatever decision's made, you need to make sure it's clearly recorded. If functional skills are being removed, the training plan needs to be re-signed, and it's important for audit purposes, so you'll want to keep this paperwork safe and secure. The review meetings are really important, and as we know, there's a very short deadline to get them done. But I just want to be clear, these meetings shouldn't just be about filling out paperwork. It's a chance for a meaningful conversation with the apprentice and their employers as to what the right course of action is. And the aim should be to make sure learners fully understand their options and feel confident in their decisions. And while Ofsted haven't commented much on the rule changes yet, they are definitely still going to care about improving literacy and numeracy outcomes for learners. So it's important these meetings are focused on truly supporting the learner development. Make sure you document them thoroughly to show both the learner and employer are actively involved in this decision-making process. To make life easier, for Aptem customers, we've suggested creating a custom review template. This will help you structure the conversation and ensure all key information is captured. Again, we've created some suggestions for building this template in this Help Centre article, but asking people to please feel free to adapt it to suit your own needs and processes. Scheduling and tracking these meetings ahead of time will help you make sure you meet that 1st of April deadline. And we'd recommend during the meeting to ask questions that go beyond do you want to withdraw and focus on how functional skills support the learner's current and future career goals. Once the meeting is complete, you can get everyone to sign off on this review, which will be a crucial step for compliance and help with your quality assurance. Once the learner's made their decision, there's several things that need to happen next. If they choose to withdraw from functional skill, you'll need to withdraw them back to their last recorded date in learning, and your funding will stop from that date. Again, for Aptem customers, we recommend using the ILR tracker to notify your MIS team about this so you have a recorded conversation. And then you'll need to remember to update the training plan and get it re-signed. If learners do decide to continue, which we hope some will, they must attempt their assessments before Gateway even if they don't pass. The important thing is that they take the test. And so you'll need to be able to track assessment bookings and results, and we recommend you do this using Aptem's assessment grid in the registration and certification menu. One more tip, for Aptem customers, you might want to consider using markers in the learner profile to record decisions, which will make future recording easier. When it comes to updating the learning plan for learners who withdraw, it's important that you reflect the updates and make sure their last date of learning is recorded correctly. You'll need to update activities, and you'll need to have the training plan re-signed by employer and learner. So that will mean removing any future functional skills activities from the actual learning plan activities. And for Aptem customers, the way you'll do this will depend on how you've built your learning plans and your functional skills. If your functional skills activities are part of a sub-program, simply deleting the sub-program will remove any incomplete activities, but will keep all the evidence of your completed ones so you can evidence your last day in learning for functional skills. If your functional skills activities are part of your main program, then you will need to remove each future data activity individually. And as we've said, don't forget to manually update your ILR so that you get an accurate recording of the last day in learning and avoid any compliance issues. We are in the process of adding some new functionality to Aptem, which will come out in the next release. And that's going to allow you in the learner profile to be able to record your functional skills qualifications as opted out. At the moment, you have an option for yes and no. From the release, you will have the opted out option. That will show in the learner profile, and it will also pull through to the key milestones on the learning plan when you regenerate it. So it will clearly show where a qualification has been enrolled, withdrawn, due to this opted out option. This is functionality that we're getting through, and we should be in time for the next major feature release in a couple of weeks' time. When you update the learning plan, we also recommend adding a note to the functional skills section to document the decision that's been made. That, along with the updating the qualification, will create a clear audit trail and help you stay compliant with the new funding rules. And what that will look like in your updated training plan is you'll have a statement in the functional skills section, and you'll have your key milestone shown as opted out, which should allow you, along with your functional skills review, to be able to clearly demonstrate the action you've taken. Hopefully that's given some advice to customers who are using Aptem. If you're using a different software provider to manage your apprenticeships, then I would suggest similar actions are taken. And I'm going to hand back to Tony now for the last few slides.
Thank you, Georgina. Very interesting. And I thought a really important point that you made that I think is worth re-emphasizing is that your conversations with learners and employers should be as meaningful as you can make them. And I know you're up against time. If you're a big provider, if you've got hundreds or thousands of learners, that might be affected here, you've got a big task to do in not a long period of time. But try to make those conversations as meaningful as possible, so that they are focused on supporting the development of the learner. Just saying, do you want to do this or not, without discussing the implications and what might still be possible in terms of functional skills development for that individual, I think would be a pity. I understand the time constraints, but try to do your best to make that, as Georgina has said, as meaningful for the learner as you possibly can. I just very quickly wanted to cover just 2 or 3 other points, because there were some other changes in the recently published version 2 of the funding rules for this year that have almost gone unnoticed in all the hiatus around functional skills. So the training plan, as both myself and Georgina have said, must include any change to functional skills delivery. Another change in the funding rules was around reserved funds. So for non-levy employers, that you are no longer able to submit an ILR if funds have not been reserved and the apprenticeship service record with the employer has not been appropriately credited. I think that should be rather than created. with transfer of funds, the receiving employer, so if we're in a situation whereby funds are transferring from, perhaps a levy payer to a non-levy payer or what have you, the receiving employer now has 6 weeks to accept the transfer. So if they fail to do that within the 6 weeks deadline, then that transfer effectively lapses. And then they have 3 months to begin using the funds, and that's 3 months from the date of acceptance. So again, if they're accepted within the 6 weeks, but the apprentice hasn't been recruited or hasn't started or what have you within 3 months, then again, those funds will have lapsed and you'll have to go through the process again. If you're involved with flexi job agencies, when it comes to providing your services as a training provider, then you must operate as an employer provider. And by that, I mean that you can only justify your costs on a cost basis. You are not allowed a profit element. Independent training providers are allowed to operate at a profit. That's accepted and confirmed in the funding rules. But if you're an FJAA, a flexi job apprenticeship agency, then you have to act as an employer provider would, i.e. you can only function at cost. Thank you. Next slide, please. So that's it, more or less. Just a few thoughts from me around all of this before we dive into questions in a couple of minutes. The functional skills changes, in some respects, I welcome the flexibilities associated with this. In other respects, I'm left slightly puzzled. I do not like one of the strengths of our apprenticeship system over the last few years has been that it is almost, there are one or two exceptions, but it is broadly age irrelevant, age agnostic, if you like. Doesn't matter if you're 17 or 50, you went through the same apprenticeship program. Now that is not the case. And one of the things that is interesting is that you can have somebody who's a 16-year-old, just failed their maths GCSE, but has been subject to 11 years of compulsory education on the subject of maths. They have to undertake further maths training for the duration of their apprenticeship, irrespective. You can have a 50-year-old or a 55-year-old who's not been anywhere near maths training for the better part of 40 years, who does not have to undertake any other than what might be embedded within the apprenticeship standard, as we've talked about, functional skills training. And that just to me seems a little odd. If anything, you would think it would be the other way around, however. So I'm not a fan of age-related distinctions in apprenticeships because you do get some absurdities like that. Level 7 funding, we wait. We just wait and see what's coming out here. And, as I said at the beginning, the announcement is imminent, we are told. So let's have our fingers crossed for that. Shorter duration apprenticeships. I hope that is only restricted to very few. At the moment, there are those 3 that have been identified. Skills England will, during the course of time, identify any others that they think are appropriate. Personally, I hope that list is a short list, because I do worry about the potential for quality to suffer a little bit here. I do accept there are some apprenticeships where actually delivering in 12 months is quite difficult. So I have a client who's in the travel sector delivering the travel consultant one, and it is quite difficult during the summer holidays to, from May to September to get people to do work on their apprenticeship because they're abroad. So, that would be a good case for me to consider doing it over 8 months. So there are circumstances where 8 months does actually make sense. But, the 12 months seems a sensible period of time for the vast majority of apprenticeships. And I seriously hope that, that isn't compromised too much by this. I don't think it will be, but I hope not. Foundation apprenticeships, well, again, we wait. Let's wait and see what happens. I think that's going to be interesting in exactly what format they come out. Payment simplification, I welcome that. I think that's encouraging. Let's see if it happens. Changes to endpoint assessment, lots and lots of unanswered questions, and lots of additional things that we all need to understand before I think we can make a rational judgment about any of that. So I think, Georgina, that's now question time, isn't it? Yes. Good. Okay.
Thank you, Peter. Well, thank you, Tony. We've had an awful lot of questions. Some of them we may need to follow up afterwards, but I will just try and pull some key questions through that you might be able to help people with during this session. So one was quite interesting. Who will take priority in the discussion about continuing or stopping functional skills? Will it be the apprentice or the employer?
Well, the funding rules say that the conversation should be with them both. So let's just clarify that to begin with. The conversation is expected to be with both the employer and the apprentice. Who takes precedent or preference? That's a really good question. My advice to providers would be, you need to pose the question, you need to give them the facts. If there is disagreement, if the employer says, I want you to do it, and the learner says, no, I don't want to do it, then all you can do as the provider is, help and assist that discussion. Ultimately, there has to be a decision about this. And so, but I wouldn't try to get too involved in the arguments between that. As I say, you can highlight the benefits of continuing or whatever you want to do, but it is for them both to come to an agreement around this. So, yeah, and I can see that happening a few times around the piece where potentially the employer will want them to continue. I mean, it's interesting, anecdotally, my clients are already telling me that they are having a far higher number of learners saying they want to continue than they anticipated. But, we'll see how that works out. But yeah, all you can do is to facilitate the discussion and await the outcome.
Yeah. I think it's really positive that people are seeing learners want to continue and seeing the importance of English and maths. I think that's a really positive thing. So I'm pleased that we're getting that feedback. Another quite interesting question is: Can the learner choose to complete only one of the functional skills subjects? So, for instance, they only want to do maths but not continue with their English. Have you any thoughts on that?
Yes, they can. They can. They can choose to do neither, both, or one.
I suppose that will depend on the sort of industry they're in and what they really need to support that job role.
Yep.
Yeah. Someone else has said that you mentioned that we'll need to evidence that we've had the discussion around continuation of functional skills with learners and employers. What type of evidence do you think will be acceptable? Will an update to the training plan suffice, or will there need to be supplementary evidence?
Well, I'm a great believer in just providing as much evidence as you practically can. And I sometimes think the department, when they write the funding rules, have this vision in their head that every provider is going to drive around to every learner's workplace and sit down over a cup of coffee and have that conversation. Clearly, that's not going to happen. The vast majority will be done either by telephone or by a video call, I suspect. I would, as well as updating, if there's a change, if the learner decides and the employer agrees that they're not going to do their functional skills anymore, then the training plan is changed, that's fine. But even when the training plan is not changed, where they both agree they're going to carry on, I think it's good practice, and I would certainly do this. If I'm a training provider, I would email after the discussion both the employer and the learner and say, we met on this date, we discussed what you want to do, functional skills, and we all agreed that you will continue to study them. Therefore, I wish to confirm, we will continue with your planned functional skills training, and there will be no changes to your training plan. Attach that email to the learner file, and you've then got a formal record that you've had the discussion, and there can be no arguments for any subsequent audit.
Brilliant. I think for Aptem customers, that's why we're very much recommending doing a bespoke functional skills review,
Yeah,
because
yeah,
that can be done either remote, face-to-face, on Teams, but you then do get that functionality where that review document can be generated and signed by all parties through the system, which just saves you having to do the follow-up email. You can actually do it through the system. So absolutely, I think having evidence of that discussion is going to be really important, particularly where they decide to continue. So that
absolutely.
and you're not adapting the training plan.
Mhm.
Um, we've had one question from someone. Do you think the ESFA will be lenient with the short time frame they've given to implement these changes? As a provider of over 1,000 learners, it's a big ask to have these robust and meaningful conversations recorded prior to the 1st of April.
Uh, um, One would hope so. I mean, the funding rules say must. You know, this discussion must take place by the 1st of April. Okay, so that's pretty clear and unambiguous. But if you've got 1,000 learners and you've managed to do 930 of them by the 1st of April, and you do the other 70 by the 7th of April, I don't think that's going to be too much of a problem. There has to be some give and take here, given the fact that they only sort of gave you 6 weeks or so to perform the task anyway, without any notice. So yes, providing the vast majority are done, if you've got a few stragglers afterwards, then that won't be a problem.
And a sort of follow-up question to that, we did have someone asking about if the learners were currently on a break in learning, so couldn't be contacted before the 1st of April. I'm assuming for those learners, having the conversation as part of their return to learning will be sufficient.
Absolutely. If someone's on a bill, you do not have to have the conversation with them.
Yeah. Another slightly unrelated question, but someone said if we've drawn down all funds for functional skills, so basically I think that's talking about someone who's passed their planned end date,
Yep.
and then the apprentice decides they don't want to attempt their assessment, will you be required to pay back the funds?
That's a really good question, and that's one of the questions we've asked the department. Interestingly enough, so that's a definite. We'll come back to you on that because you have drawn down the funds on the basis that the learner will achieve their level 2 assessments. So it's a really good question to say if they're out of funded, if they pass a planned end date, and they change their mind, what happens then? So I don't know is the answer to that, but as I say, once the department have told us, then we can come back to you with that.
Super. And another, again, slightly interesting scenario, and I've heard this from a couple of conversations we've had with providers as well. If a professional body, such as the nursing body, saying that level 2 functional skills is still required in the programme as a gateway requirement for the endpoint assessment, how does that leave providers being able to give the employer an apprenticeship choice? EPAOs don't seem to be getting with the programme quite as quickly as the ESFA, I think. Have you any thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I am involved with a provider that delivers the veterinary nursing standard at level 2. That's a regulated mandatory qualification apprenticeship regulated by the Royal College of Veterinary Surgeons, and they have a requirement that you have to have the level 2 by Gateway. And they have already said that they are not going to change that requirement. So I think there will be some apprenticeships, a handful, with mandatory quals offered by regulated authorities, like nursing, like vet nursing. You can think of some others where actually this change will not be applicable because the regulator says so. And usually the regulator trumps historically trumps the SFA and presumably will trump Skills England. So my advice would be you need to go to the regulator and ask them what their attitude is to this.
Yeah, super. I think it'd be interesting to have a question that isn't about functional skills, just to maybe wrap things up. We've had a question: is it a possibility that the short duration apprenticeships will eventually apply to all sectors?
I hope not. To answer more seriously, Skills England are going to be identifying which ones they think can be delivered in 8 months. Again, we don't know whether there will just be two sorts of apprenticeships, one over 8 months and one over 12 months, or whether there might be some over 9 or 10 or 11. We don't know that for certain yet. But at the moment, there are the 12. They are suggesting that there will be, that this will not be the majority of apprenticeships. Far from it. This will be quite a few, potentially, not that many, a handful or so. We know the first three. There will be others, but I seriously don't think, and I'm loath to put a number on it, but I seriously don't think there will be that many that are allowed to be delivered in less than a year. But, I think we'd have to fast forward 18 months and see how many there are then.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Well, we have had quite a few other questions, but I'm aware that we're running close to time. Some of them we probably do need to follow up because they relate to some of the outstanding questions that Tony's got with the agency anyway. So we will go through all the questions after this webinar and make sure that we give answers to all of you as best we can. So thank you very, very much for asking the questions, and thank you very much for Tony for giving us your fantastic insight into the answers from those.
It's a great pleasure. I hope you've all found it useful. As Georgina has said, we will attempt to answer all of those questions. Some of them we're going to have to wait until the department come back to us. But hope you've enjoyed it. Hope you found it useful. And thank you very much for joining us this afternoon.
Yeah. And thank you very much, Tony, for sharing your insight. And just for the last 2 minutes, I'm going to hand back over to James, who's going to just give us some updates on some of our future planned events.
Thank you, Georgina. Thank you both for running today's session. I'm almost certain that everyone in attendance today has found this webinar incredibly useful. As we approach the end of this session, I'd like to invite you to visit our website. The link is in the chat now. If you wish to catch up with any of our industry webinars on demand, or if you'd like to share it with your colleagues or anyone in your network. Looking ahead to our next webinars, we're running on Tuesday, the 18th of March, 11 a.m. to 11:30 a.m. We are running a live demo of how Aptem fuels exceptional growth and learner success. Now, if you wish to register for that, the link is in the chat now. I would encourage you to attend this. Aptem is, of course, I'd say, an exceptional system, and it fuels exceptional growth and learner success. So please do attend that if you have 30 minutes on the 18th. The other webinar we have is the Aptem product roadmap update, where we will give an overview of Q1 2025's roadmap and give a sneak peek of what's coming in the next few Aptem releases. We will be sending out the webinar invites shortly for all of these. Thank you once again to Tony and Georgina, and for all of you for taking the time to join this afternoon. Please look out for the recording in your inbox in the coming days, and we'll also upload it to our website. Wishing you all a lovely day, and goodbye.